We're going deep on UFOs this time. You've given me quite the stack of stuff to get through. News articles, historical accounts, even congressional testimony.
It's really amazing when you think about it how the whole UFO thing seems to be tied up with human history. Like it reflects how our technology has advanced and how we feel about the unknown.
Yeah, like imagine seeing something weird in the sky back in the 1940s. No internet to check, the Cold War heating up. People must have gone wild with theories.
Absolutely. And that's where we'll begin right after World War II, when this whole modern UFO craze took off. 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold's experience over Washington State, that's what set the stage.
This wasn't just any pilot either. Arnold knew his stuff, so when he reported seeing 9 unusual objects, people paid attention. He said they moved like a saucer if you skip it across water. But here's the thing, he never actually said flying saucer.
It's incredible how stories change as they're passed on, isn't it? Newspapers, always hungry for a catchy headline, they zeroed in on that saucer comparison, and bam, just like that, flying saucer was stuck in everyone's minds.
It's kind of mind-blowing how one pilot's observation, maybe exaggerated by the media, kicked off a global phenomenon.
It tells you a lot about our fascination with what we don't understand, but also about how much power the media has, especially when times are uncertain. Remember, the world was still recovering from World War II, and the Cold War was just starting. People were on edge, ready to see threats, even in the sky.
And speaking of threats, just a few weeks after Arnold's sighting, something big happened that really threw gasoline on that UFO fire.
Roswell.
Roswell, the granddaddy of all conspiracy theories, right? Crashed alien spaceship, government cover-up, even stories about alien bodies. It's got everything a good conspiracy needs.
It really does. So let's cut to the chase. What actually went down in that New Mexico desert back in '47? Well, the sources you've given me suggest something a little less exciting than aliens, something very much rooted in Cold War paranoia. Project Mogul. They were using these high-altitude balloons made with weird materials for the time to keep tabs on Soviet nuclear tests. One of these balloons went down near Roswell, and because the project was top secret, the military couldn't exactly come clean about what it really was.
So the flying saucer that had everyone in a tizzy was actually a spy tool. I bet that was a letdown for folks hoping to meet some extraterrestrials.
For sure. Roswell shows just how fast misinformation can spread, especially when the government's being secretive. It's something we'll see again as we dig deeper into this UFO business.
And spread it did. Roswell became like the poster child for UFOs. Every time the government tried to explain it away, it just made the conspiracy theory stronger.
It's like they accidentally created this cycle of suspicion and theories, and it's still going strong today. But before we move on, let's think about the effect these early events had. It wasn't just regular folks seeing strange lights. Even people in charge, officials, were reporting weird stuff. And that brings us to how the government dealt with the public's growing fascination and honestly fear about UFOs.
So with UFOs all over the news, and even the government taking notice, what did they do to try and understand this whole thing?
Well, they did what governments usually do. They launched an investigation. They called it Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's attempt to get to the bottom of the UFO mystery. It ran for almost 20 years, from 52 to 69.
Project Blue Book, wow. They must have been flooded with UFO reports. Did they find anything concrete in those 2 decades?
Over 12,000 reported sightings they looked into. Everything from everyday folks to military personnel. The interesting thing is most of those sightings, over 90% actually, they figured out. Misidentified aircraft, weather stuff, hoaxes, things that had a simple explanation.
So like mistaking a bright star for a spaceship? Or weather balloons playing tricks on the eye?
Yeah, exactly. The sources you gave me show how often it was just a lack of information and a little bit of imagination leading to these wild conclusions.
Okay, but what about the other 10% of cases? The ones Project Blue Book couldn't explain? Those must have been the real deal, right?
Not quite. See, even though they labeled some sightings as unexplained, that doesn't mean they found aliens. It just means they didn't have enough information to say for sure what the person saw.
So not enough evidence, not proof of aliens. But you'd think a big project like this, officially backed and all, would have calmed people down a bit, right?
To some extent, yeah, it gave people some peace of mind. But the doubt was there, And some incidents, like that whole thing with the radar in Washington, D.C. back in '52, they kept the UFO debate alive.
That D.C. incident really captured everyone's attention. What happened there with the radar?
It just goes to show how tricky it can be to understand data that doesn't make sense at first. See, at first they couldn't explain those radar readings. But after looking into it more, it seems like they were probably caused by what they call temperature inversions. Basically, you've got these layers of warm and cold air, and they can mess with radar signals, creating false readings that look like fast-moving objects.
So another case of a natural phenomenon being mistaken for something extraterrestrial.
You got it. It really highlights something crucial about this whole UFO thing. We got to think critically. We got to rely on good sources. Just because something seems strange doesn't automatically mean it's breaking the laws of physics or that it's aliens.
It's like that saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Exactly. A lot of times, if you just dig a little deeper, you find a perfectly normal explanation. But it seems like people's fascination with UFOs wasn't going away anytime soon.
Right. Project Blue Book might have ended in '69, but the mystery of UFOs never really went away. In fact, in the 21st century, it feels like people are even more interested, what with all the new technology and, of course, new evidence.
You're right. Those Pentagon videos that were released between 2004 and 2017, those really got people talking about UFOs again. Once again, you see how powerful images and videos can be.
And these weren't just blurry photos like we used to have. These were videos taken by U.S. Navy pilots using high-tech equipment. The sources you had me look at focused on a few of those. The 2004 Nimitz encounter, the incidents involving the Roosevelt in 2014 and 2015, and then another interesting one from 2015. So, what were people seeing in these videos, and why were some convinced they showed alien spaceships?
Well, each video, as weird as it seemed at first, can actually be explained if you understand the technology involved and if you use a little bit of logic.
Okay, let's bring it down. What's actually in these videos, and why did some people jump to the conclusion that it was aliens?
Let's start with that 2004 Nimitz video. It shows this, well, oblong-shaped thing zipping around and then disappearing. Lots of folks said it was moving crazy fast, like impossibly fast. But that's not really what the footage shows.
So what looked like super speed was actually...
Yeah, probably just the camera losing track of the object. See, those cameras are meant to follow fast-moving jets, not necessarily some random thing against the open ocean.
Makes sense? What about those Roosevelt incidents in 2014 and 2015? The objects in those seemed to be spinning, and people were saying that meant it had to be some kind of gravity-defying tech.
Again, most likely an optical illusion. Those infrared cameras the pilots use, they have this quirk where sometimes the image looks like it's rotating, even when the actual object isn't.
Wow, so not aliens, just the camera playing tricks.
Exactly. And lastly, there's that video from 2015 where the object looks colder than everything around it. Some folks thought that was a sure sign of alien tech.
But I bet there's a simpler explanation for that, too.
Absolutely. Like any technology, thermal imaging has its limits. What looks like something out of the ordinary could just be the camera processing the heat data in a weird way.
So if you look at it logically, these Pentagon videos, while definitely cool to watch, don't necessarily mean it's aliens.
Exactly. The really interesting thing about those videos isn't what they show, but the reactions they got. They prove how quick we are to jump to conclusions, especially when something seems to back up what we already believe.
It's like we want to believe in the unbelievable so badly that it clouds our judgment.
For sure. And that brings us to one of the most recent and probably the most intriguing parts of our UFO deep dive, the whistleblower and what he's claiming.
You're talking about David Grusch, right?
Okay.
So, former intelligence guy who testified before Congress in 2023, his testimony was a bombshell, to say the least. He claimed the government's been sitting on a huge secret for decades. Crashed UFOs and even non-human biologics, alien bodies.
Yep, that's him. And not just recovered, but actively being taken apart and studied, this supposed alien technology.
That's a wild claim. When you put it all together, Arnold, Roswell, Project Blue Book, the Pentagon videos, and now it does kind of feel like there's this big pattern of cover-ups and hidden truths.
It's a compelling narrative, for sure, but it's important to stay a little bit skeptical, especially since Grusch, for all his background and the seriousness of his claims, hasn't really given us any solid, verifiable proof yet.
So what are we supposed to believe? Is Grusch telling the truth? Is the government really hiding alien technology and maybe even aliens themselves? I'm really interested to hear what you think about this. It really is the big question, isn't it? Is there any truth to what Grusch is saying? He's claiming something absolutely massive, but we haven't actually seen any proof.
That's the heart of it, right? Grusch's story, it hinges on secondhand information, things he's heard from others. He even says himself that he hasn't personally laid eyes on this physical evidence he's talking about.
So what are we left with then? Are we just supposed to believe him, even with something this big, without seeing any proof?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Before he went public, Grusch went to the Department of Defense, specifically the office that decides what former intel folks can talk about. And they cleared him to share his story.
Hold on. So the government, the very people who are supposedly keeping this massive secret, they gave him the okay to tell everyone. That doesn't really make sense.
You see, that's the thing. If what Grusch is saying was truly a threat to national security, if they were really hiding something this huge, they wouldn't have let him say a single word about it.
That's a really good point. So why go public with these claims if he doesn't have any hard evidence? And on the other hand, why would the government let him?
Those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? Some people think Grusch is part of something bigger, maybe trying to force the government's hand to get them to finally reveal what they know about UFOs. Others say he might be mistaken himself, caught up in all the rumors and speculation.
And we might never know for sure. It seems kind of fitting when you think about it. This whole UFO thing, it's all about mystery.
It is, isn't it? And that's a big part of why it's so captivating. It speaks to that part of us that wants to believe, that feels like there's something more out there, something beyond what we can currently understand. But as we've seen throughout our deep dive, you got to be careful, got to think for yourself, and got to be a little skeptical.
We've got to separate what's likely true from what's just fantasy, check our sources, and remember that just because we don't have evidence for something doesn't automatically mean it's something extraordinary.
Well said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of UFOs, one last thought to leave you with. If there really was a civilization out there, one that could travel across the stars, would they announce themselves to us by, crashing in the desert or playing cat and mouse with our fighter jets? Maybe the truth is out there, but it could be a whole lot stranger, a whole lot more complex than we ever imagined.